One-sided beatdown. Published by web novel. Arrows, spells, stones and even people all rushed from the fort in a mad attempt to stop me, but Belle and Lily quickly moved to intercept these things as the dark sun got smaller and smaller. Belle had managed to somehow time the creation of the air platforms under his boots with the flying attacks to cause them to stop prematurely, while Lily turned into a dark metal and simply tanked whatever he missed. By the time the first adventurers from the Apollo Familia got close, it was too late as I had finished my preparations. The dark sun was now no more than an abyssal dark orb the size of an orange at the front of the staff. I pointed it at the gate of the fort. Eclipse. I spoke and unleashed my attack. The world vanished. I couldn't see, smell or hear anything once the attack was released, or to be more specific, I was being overwhelmed with sensory information. Just as fast as it came, however, it ended and I could witness the aftermath. A molten trench nearly 30 yards across and over a mile long extended from in front of the staff I was holding out. The middle of the fort was entirely gone alongside everyone and everything that had been there. Crack. In the silence after the attack, the first sound to appear was the sound of the staff spider webbing along its entire length before the wind blew and it turned to dust that went with the breeze. I had expected this, however, as I knew that I was not at the point in my crafting where I could create something like this and expect it to last beyond a single use. That staff was created with one ability and only one, the ability to enhance and contain my hellfire. This level of power was far beyond me by myself, so I created an amplifier for my flames with a massive amount of restrictions and one single use, just for this moment. I staggered on my feet, however, as the backlash from killing so many innocent souls hit me. My eyes watered and my hands shook as I was assailed with a massive amount of guilt and weakness as I felt my strength, my stats, leave me. Despite this show of weakness, no one dared to try and capitalize on it. Fear prevented it. That fear was a very logical thing, as this sort of destruction was the sort of thing you'd expect from a level 4 or 5 mage, not a level 2 who was not a mage. None of them came to this place expecting to deal with that sort of thing. In fact, most of these adventurers probably thought that this was going to be an easy win for them. I stabilized from my penalty after about a minute, and squeezing my fist, I estimated that I might have dropped an entire rank in each of my stats for that good 30 to 40 souls I had killed. While Apollo was a pretty shitty god, his Familia members still had mostly innocent souls, so the penalty I paid to kill so many of them was very steep. While my body had stabilized, however, my cursed energy had definitely not. In fact, it was practically rioting at the moment, and the only reason I wasn't suffering from that was that my energy reserve was a smidge off from me hitting mine 0. As a lovely little side effect, my head was pounding like someone had decided to use my brain as a tennis ball. I wasn't going to chug a mana potion though, as I wanted my cursed energy to chill the fuck out first. I took a step towards the fort's now wide open front, and none of the Apollo Familia were brave enough to get in my way, at least not at first. It was only after their brains rebooted and they remembered that if they didn't stop me, they'd need to find a new Familia. It wasn't loyalty exactly that got them to try and stop me so much as personal benefit. I was sluggish and a smidge slow to act as I got swarmed with all sorts of weapons from all directions as I set foot in the fort. Belle and Lily had me covered though, as they followed close by my side as we fended off the assault. It was rough at first, but as time progressed, my mind and body sharpened up and adapted to my new state, and that was pretty much all it took to seal the fate of the Apollo Familia. Even after the stat drop, I was still in the power range of a level 3, and besides the captain of their Familia, they only had level 2s and 1s. Dodge, block, swing, grab, dodge. This was the set of actions that I went through over and over again in a different order to dispatch more and more of the Familia. Knock out, not kill, mind you. Once about 20 were left, the captain of the Familia decided that he needed to step in, as it was clear that if he didn't, it would be him versus both Belle and I, as Lily had gotten taken down after her transformation ended. It was a discus of flame launched at myself when I wasn't paying attention. FWOOSH. It exploded on contact with my back, and I staggered from the impact with a hiss of pain. My shirt and back had been burned up and my skin bubbled and black from the heat. That was all though, as thanks to my curse technique's influence on my body, I was quite flame resistant. Under the shocked gaze of mortals and gods, I flexed my back and activated my curse technique wordlessly to fix the damage the magic had done. This put my reserves back to almost empty, but my back was now unblemished as I turned to stare down the caster. Wait your fucking turn, I'll deal with you in a minute, I said firmly, and the dude legitimately backed away with a horrified look on his face. Monster, he shouted at me, but I merely laughed before turning my attention back to the stragglers. Soon enough, all that was left was a black-haired girl with a traumatized look on her face protecting the unconscious form of a red-haired girl in a corner. The awake girl was holding a staff but was clearly too terrified to use it as I approached. You should join our Familia after this is over. You seem like a good fit protecting your friend like this, I said with a smile, not that she could see it. Both of their souls were clean and clear of sin, and I was especially interested in the strange features of this girl's soul that I had not ever seen before in another soul. It was as though she had a sort of fog covering a part of it that seemed to try and incite disbelief about something, but I had no idea what exactly. The End and the Other Perspective. Published by web novel. Why, you aren't going to kill us? The girl stuttered out, clearly surprised. Nope, still got to knock you out though, rules and all that, no hard feelings, yeah? I said with a smile before sucker punching her just hard enough to put her out, but not enough to serious hurt her. I holstered my weapon under the confused gaze of gods and mortals alike before walking over to the nearby stairs and taking a seat. What are you planning, monster? The captain dude demanded. Not a thing, but unless he fucks up this next part, but otherwise it's got nothing to do with me, I said casually while pointing at Belle. You think he can defeat me? What a joke. The last time I fought him he couldn't even keep up with me, the man said, clearly insulted at the implication. He's not the same as when you fought him previously. Besides, if I have to fight you, I'll be a lot less nice about it than he will. Might disfigure you out of irritation, and we certainly wouldn't want that now, would we? I asked casually but meant every word. He clearly picked this up as he shuddered and decided to deal with Belle first after all. I meanwhile turned my attention to quelling the chaotic cursed energy in my reserve. It did not like that penalty I took, so now I had to calm it back to relatively normal, as otherwise I'd need to vent it near constantly rather than allow it to regenerate and cause me problems. Now that I had a moment to focus on this task, it wasn't particularly difficult, as I just had to force it to sit still for a few moments, which chilled it out. Once that was done, I started to pay attention to the fight between Belle and the captain dude. It was fairly even, as the guy was only just a bit faster than Belle but more limited, since unlike Belle, who had magic and aerial movement ability, the guy just had magic. His magic also took longer to prepare than Belle's and was less useful as well. My name is Love, precious child of light. I offer my body to my son. My name is Sin, jealousy of wind. I call a gust of wind to my body. Release ring of fire. Come, wind of the west, he chanted while fending Belle's attacks off. When he was done, a discus of fire formed and shot after Belle but unexpectedly honed in on him, so he couldn't just dodge it. When it got close enough, the captain dude spoke again. Repele, he called, and the discus exploded, throwing Belle sideways with a few burns. Belle wasn't just going to take that though, and held up a hand. Lightbolt, he called, and white energy rapidly gathered in front of his palm before exploding in a blinding flash. Arg, my eyes, the captain dude screams while covering his eyes. I couldn't exactly blame him either, as Belle's magic was as vicious as it was versatile if used right. See, the way it worked was that he had a total of 6 elements he could add in front of the word bolt to create different effects. Wind, fire, water, earth, light and dark. Wind created a blast of high pressure wind that was good for knocking things away. Fire created a straight up explosion of the stuff directed where you point. Water released a thin beam of fast pressurized water that cut anything it hit. Earth spawned a literal stone that got launched at the spot pointed. Light was effectively a flashbang without the bang, and dark was basically a curse of slowness if you got hit with it, as it suddenly felt like you were moving underwater. Yeah, Belle's magic was broken as hell when he actually used it right. That short chant time also meant that he was able to spam that shit if he wanted to, though it was a bad idea due to the cost involved. Anyways, with the dude blind, Belle rushed in and started slicing him up like a Christmas ham. The guy's armor was some decent stuff and so held up against the rush pretty good, so that by the time the guy could effectively defend himself again rather than flail his sword around in a panic, he had only taken surface level cuts. He played off being blind longer than was actually true to try and hit Belle while he was in midair, only for Belle to create an air platform to move away without a scratch. Wind bolt, dark bolt. Belle chained 2 spells back to back that knocked the captain off balance and then weakened him. Bell didn't use any more magic for the rest of the fire after that, but he also didn't need to, as the captain dude was now the one getting overwhelmed and soon enough dropped from blood loss, at which point Bell knocked him out. Tap 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 tap. I clapped slowly while Bell panted tiredly but had a satisfied smile on his face. Very good job. You probably could have finished it faster if you hadn't toyed with him a little, but I think I'll let it slide this time, I said teasingly, congratulating him. The boy just smiled and scratched his head in embarrassment at being called out. Still, like this, the war game was over and it was time to collect the spoils of our victory. Third person Pav Donatus Hall, hours ago. The gods had gathered in the Donatus Hall at the upper floors of Babel to witness a war game between the Apollo Familia and the Hestia Familia. I hope you were prepared to pay when you lose, Hestia, Apollo said with a lustful smile. Enjoy the last moments in, or are you pervert? Hestia shot back before choosing to ignore him. The appointed time is upon us, my compatriots. Oranos, I request permission to use the divine mirrors. Hermes called, and an older heavy voice spoke up from nowhere and seemingly everywhere. Granted, it spoke. Hermes glowed golden for a moment as he released his divine power and snapped his fingers. Immediately several screens, displaying both the fort from different angles and the trio from the Hestia Familia appeared in midair, both in this chamber as well as all over Orario for those watch from elsewhere. What is that? A monster? Some sort of helm? How fitting, Tilda. Gods in the chamber were immediately drawn to Alex's current appearance as he walked with Belle and Lily towards the fort. My goodness, what a frightening visage the captain of the Hestia Familia has chosen to wear. How does he see out of it without any eye holes? Hermes commentated through the mirrors. The inside is transparent, I'd wager. His workshop is very similar. Such a wicked appearance he chose though. I love it, Ptah said with an excited smile. Forget that, I want to know what he has wrapped up, Loki said, and they all finally noticed the thing resting on his shoulder wrapped up to conceal it. Shock and awe. Published by web novel. Third person Pav Donatus chamber. Many gods look at Hestia hoping that she could spare some insight on the mysterious item. The small goddess shakes her head. All he told me was that it was a surprise that he whipped up for this, she said honestly and helplessly. Oh, and the Apollo Familia has spotted the approaching Hestia Familia and began setting up defensive and offensive lines to defend the fort, Hermes commentated excitedly. The gods watched with bated breath to see how the Hestia Familia would deal with this situation. They were surprised when they stopped so far from the fort, and even more so when Alex started unwrapping the thing he was holding. A staff? What material is that? So pretty. I want one. Me too. The gods chattered excitedly at the staff that gleamed under the sun within Alex's hand. They watched him raise the staff curiously, but that rapidly turned into shock and awe at what happened next. Before creation comes destruction, Alex's voice rang out clear and firm from the mirrors. Then the black fire erupted from the staff, making the gods and mortals alike watching this play out gasp in shock, awe, or in a few cases, horror. Impossible. She's cheated somehow. There's no way that a level 2 could have that much power. Apollo screeched angrily and full of accusation. Are you implying that this mortal has somehow managed to fool the perception of all of his gods at the same time? Nyx questioned Apollo with a very unfriendly look. Well, no, but surely you can see that this is clearly impossible. He is a level 2 for goodness sake, and not even a mage at that, Apollo said, defending himself fearfully. Would it not be more likely that we simply lack the necessary information to determine whether or not it's possible? For all we know, that staff might demand a massive cost to achieve such results? Hephaestus asked, and many of the other gods nodded in agreement. Apollo went silent at that, but still glared hatefully at the mirror displaying the events of the war game. He got even more upset when he noticed the clear resemblance between the massive black flame sphere and the sun in the sky. The gods watching in eager excitement as the dark sun fell and the signs of its heat appeared while it started condensing. When Lily and Belle started defending Alex from the Apollo Familia's attacks, the sun god erupted in anger again. Hestia's Familia are obviously using outside magical items. Surely that is against the rules we specified, right? He demanded, and Hestia scoffed. Alex made all of that himself. There is not a single thing that was gotten from outside, she said firmly. Absurd. A mere level 2 couldn't possibly create such things. Hephaestus, your Familia is the experts on such matters, I'm right, aren't I? The sun god said, desperately looking for validation to his words. The forge goddess sighed. Normally you'd be right, however that man is anything but normal. I can personally confirm that he certainly possesses the capabilities to craft such things. If I recall correctly, Ogun here has even gotten a first-rate weapon made by Alex, she said honestly. The dark-skinned god chuckled at being called out. I had not expected to be exposed so soon, but she speaks true. It was named Red Current, and has since lived up to this name, spilling much monster blood in the dungeon, he said calmly. Eclipse. Alex's voice echoed out again, and the attention went back to the mirror as he unleashed his attack. AARG. Apollo cried out in anguish as his connection to so many of his children was cut in an instant. How ruthless. He looks so handsome, Tilda. Such power. A devastating blow to the Apollo Familia by Alexander Drake, Hermes commentated while the gods collective reacted. Look, the staff is crumbling, a god pointed out, and indeed they all saw the staff crumble to dust and blow away in the wind. So that's how he did it, clever, Hephaestus exclaimed in admiration. He traded endurance for power, a risky strategy but one that has certainly worked in this case. That power was nothing to scoff at, Loki commented seriously. The cost must be much higher than just that, though Loki seems to be on the verge of collapse. Another god called attention to Alex's wretched state. Attack him, kill him, do something, damn it. Apollo raged at the mirror as he saw his Familia frozen in fear and shock as Alex rapidly started to recover. After that they watched excitedly as the Hestia Familia fought their way through the remaining members of the Apollo Familia. They watched as Lil was taken down and how Belle and Alex were like unstoppable juggernauts. They watched Alex seemingly regenerate from the sneak attack the captain of the Apollo Familia hit him with. They saw Alex extend an invitation to one of the Apollo Familia members that was protecting their friend. And finally they watched Belle fight against that same captain while Alex sat nearby and relaxed. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. In a shocking upset, the Hestia Familia is the winner of the war game. Hermes called out from the mirrors and with a snap of his fingers ended the broadcast. Hestia, please be reasonable. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement. Apollo threw away all pride and begged Hestia for mercy, but she scoffed. You agreed to these terms, so it is only natural you should be prepared to pay them. You brought this on yourself, she said firmly. It took 2 days for all of the Apollo Familia's members to be stripped of his fauna and all of his Familia's assets to be legally passed over to Hestia. It was an event that stirred the whole of Orario, as none had thought the Hestia Familia capable of winning, and in such a decisive manner no less. The Apollo Familia might not be a first-rate Familia, but they were ranked way higher than the Hestia Familia. This was something the guild changed after this victory, as the Hestia family was now a third-rate Familia even while only having 3 members. It was a matter of quality over quantity for the guild, and this meant that the Familia was going to start performing quests for the guild for the records. Stuff like full expeditions as far as possible, resource collection quests and stuff like that. Aftermath. Published by web novel. Normal Pav. I won't waste time with all the stuff you already know about on my status, but here's what happened to my stats after I had Hestia update me once the game was over. Strength, 524, D, to 463, E. Endurance, 658, C, to 582, D. Agility, 515, D, to 467, E. Dexterity, 521, D, to 451, E. Magic, 957, S, to 911, S. The only thing that hadn't dropped a rank was my magic stat, and I was fairly certain that took all of the smoke I had saved, not much, as well as whatever Excelia I got for unleashing that one attack. To put it bluntly, I had paid a rather heavy price to warn anyone in the future against fucking with us. Add on the absolutely mind-fogging guilt that I felt as my skill went the extra mile to make me feel really bad about killing so many innocent souls, and you could say I was definitely not in the mood for any bullshit. However, bullshit was in the mood for me, and I had to personally deal with stuff as the captain of the Familia. Paperwork, certifications, taxes, inventory, and new members, just to thank Hestia. Hestia wasn't having it easy either, as she also had just as much work if not more than I. The passing of stuff from Apollo to the guild and finally to her was entirely her responsibility. As was putting her Falna on the two new members, Cassandra and Daphne. I'll get to them in a minute, but for now I should mention that we are rolling in money now. All the money the Apollo Familia had, all the weapons, armor, buildings, art, everything they had was now ours. I had to inventory all of that and then decide with Hestia what we are selling and what we are keeping. The equipment and possessions that was our new members we kept obviously, but most of the rest we loaned to the now familiarless adventurers of the Apollo Familia in exchange for a lot of IOUs. All the raw materials we kept with the art, properties and miscellaneous items like furniture and whatnot was sold off through the guild. The final total profit we made was a staggering 273 million and change valis. We were flat out told that if we had kept and renovated the mansion it would have sucked away the vast majority of our profits. Material-wise I was practically drooling at the list as there was some seriously rare and useful shit that Apollo had collected for mere aesthetic value. Unicorn horns, Vouvrae's tears, mystic crystals, jackbird eggs, a treasure tree, deep crystals and most valuable of all and my personal favorite, a draconite the size of a cherry. The rest of the materials were just the standard stuff they collected to turn into equipment for any new members they got. I'll go over the juicy stuff in detail later, but for now I suppose I should talk about our Familia's two newest members. Name, Daphne Loros. Race, human. Level, 2. Strength, 751, B. Endurance, 559, D. Agility, 934, S. Dexterity, 870, A. Magic, 347, F. Spells, round your sad face incantation. Follow blindly the sun in the sky. Blossom armor of laurel, so that all will flee from thee. Protection magic that raises the user's endurance and largely raises their agility. Its effectiveness is based on its user's magic stat. Skills, Elio's passion, slightly raises agility and grants the developmental ability, escape, temporarily if being chased. Developmental skills, abnormal resistance, I. Name, Cassandra Ilian. Race, human. Level, 2. Strength, 129, H. Endurance, 245, G. Agility, 70, I. Dexterity, 60, I. Magic, 54, I. Spells, soul light sad face incantation, heavenly light, once rejected. Merciful arms that save my shallow self. Rescue my miserable companions in place of my words that cannot reach them. O sunlight, may you beat back ruin. An area healing spell that is able to increase its effect based on the amount of mana the user uses. Cure Ephialtes sad face incantation. Cure Ephialtes, cures status ailments and can also remove curses. Skills, looks blank, not actually blank, will explain soon. Developmental skills, treatment, I. First up we have Daphne, a neatly managed red-haired girl who made it abundantly clear that she only agreed because Cassandra begged her to and because she didn't trust us not to bully Cassandra. Yeah, she was blunt as hell about her opinions and thoughts, but we were fine with that. Her status was nothing particularly special, but it was still counted as good for level 2. She used a rapier-style sword for her weapon and fought with a high emphasis on piercing stabs without getting hit. All in all a good addition to the Familia. Next up we had the black-haired girl Cassandra who looked unusually happy to join our Familia and had even dragged her friend along. She was quiet-spoken and sort of shy but had apparently seen it in a dream that she should join the Familia, which meant she was either crazy or there was something else at play here. Her stats made me excited though, as she was a healing and you know what that means, healing items. If I could stuff her healing abilities into a reusable item I could sell that shit for a fuck ton of money. Her stats were a bit low, but considering she was a backline healer-style mage who had just reached level 2 recently that was to be expected. Her equipment consisted of a charm and a staff for channeling her mana into her spells. She was very happy to see that no one in the Familia seemed to care about her previously being part of the Apollo Familia, though Daphne treated us with skepticism. Made no difference to me either way as I welcomed them both with a wide smile. Thanks to a small argument between Daphne and Cassandra about her prophetic dream, leading her to the choice of joining the Familia, I figured out why Cassandra didn't have a skill, or rather did, but it didn't show up on her Falna. No clue what it was called, but the skill concealed itself even from the Falna via her soul and every now and then gave her prophetic visions that always came true yet no one believed her about. It was like a curse built into the skill itself to stop people from noticing it and capitalizing on its effects. A Big Cynic. Published by web novel. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O.B. in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. It was fascinating to me and shocking to everyone else in the Familia when I explained it to them. Why doesn't it work on you then if what you say is true? Daphne demanded, disbelieving me. Probably because unlike everyone else I can actually see the thing thanks to my skill, soul gaze. It's very hard to convince someone they hadn't seen something when they are staring right at it. My guess is that whatever part of it is that makes others disbelieve her about it uses the fact it has no tangible proof beyond her never being wrong. It's a rather cruel gift if I'm being honest, as you can save so many lives, change destiny itself, but only by your own actions as no one else will believe you. I said with a shrug. Sounds like a curse more than a gift, Hestia said with a pitying look at Cassandra. That sounds all well and good, but I still don't believe that she can see the future or you for that matter. Daphne said bluntly while Cassandra looked sad. What exactly is so hard to believe? I have the power to play with flesh, bone or anything else from a living source like it was clay. Bell literally warps reality to accelerate his growth simply because his feelings are strong and Hestia is a literal goddess. How is my ability to see souls or her ability to see the future in a cryptic way but still the future any harder to accept? I asked seriously. Yes, but what proof do you have about any of that? Gods are there, you can see them and talk to them and touch them, but you can't do any of that with everything else you have said. The redhead said stubbornly. Are you stupid? That stuff minus her ability is written on our backs for anyone who can read it to see. It's there in undeniable fashion, or is the Falna not enough for you? I asked, getting a little irritated at her ridiculous argument. I won't believe it until I see it for myself, she insisted. Fine then, look for yourself then, I said while removing my shirt to show off my Falna. I don't know how to read hieroglyphs, that could say anything, she said with a scoff. I rolled my eyes but had Hestia copy my status onto a piece of paper in front of her. They're satisfied, and if you say that Hestia messed with it I give up since you clearly won't listen to logic and reason, I said flatly. She looked over the paper with a frown and clear shock, but at least finally seemed to accept that I did in fucking fact know what I was talking about. Let's say I believe you, what changes? She asked, clearly worried about my intentions. Not a damn thing, I said with a grin. What? She exclaimed dumbfounded. Yeah, not a thing changes because of her ability. I didn't invite you to because of that, I did it because both of you were sinless, not a trace of sin on either of your souls. You wouldn't know it cause you can't see the things like me, but that is incredibly rare in this city. Keep in mind that having sin on one's soul doesn't necessarily mean one is evil, just that they have done things they shouldn't have at some point. A common one, for example, is a lot of men have the sin of lust on their souls because they went to the pleasure district for an obvious reason. Are they evil? Not really, but what they did was sinful, I explained honestly. You mean to tell me that you stopped in the middle of a war game to give your enemy at the time an invitation to join your Familia, because we had sinless souls? Daphne asked dumbfounded. Yep, that sounds about right, I said with a grin. Are you insane? She asked, genuinely concerned. Just a little more than usual. Oh right, probably a good time to mention it, but don't try to break into my workshop. The door literally eats fingers, I said with a laugh at her expression. With that conversation out of the way I can finally explain all those materials I said I would before. Unicorn horns, Vouvrae's tears, mystic crystals, jackbird eggs, a treasure tree, deep crystals and a draconite. The first 4 were guaranteed drops from 4 rare monsters that are, as I just said, rare. Treasure trees were a sort of special dungeon-specific trees that for some reason or another grows precious gems on its bark that have a plethora of uses. It is a literal tree full of treasure. Unicorn horns had a few uses, with the most common being ground up and turned into high-level healing potions. By themselves, unicorn horns have poison purification properties and are highly prized healer catalysts. Vouvrae's tears are the red gems that adorn the foreheads of the dragon women monsters and are once again highly prized catalysts for mages. Mystic crystals come from the cat-like carbuncle monster and follow the same uses as Vouvrae's tears, though much more potent. Jackbird eggs are just solid golden eggs dropped from killing a jackbird. They have uses in alchemy and enchanted jewelry, but that was about it. Deep crystals were a sort of crystal that were considered amongst the pinnacle in terms of catalysts for mages. Finally, last but certainly not the least was the single draconite. These hard metal ores were born within a dragon's body and only when it has lived a certain amount of time or reached a certain level of strength. Naturally, this meant they were stupid rare to drop, and even when they did, they were considered almost useless for a single reason: they were impossible to forge. The things were extremely potent magical conduits and held enchantments of vast power while being durable as hell, but therein lied the issue: they were too durable. No amount of flame could so much as soften them, and no other methods seemed to work either, whether it be alchemical or magical. As a result, the things, while naturally valuable, were little more than curiosities for most people unless some idiot chose to stick one on the end of a staff as a conduit. I say that, but the things do work well enough for that role, I suppose. It just seemed like such a waste to treat the stuff like a mundane conduit when it held such potential. Potential that I rudely discovered was beyond my ability to tease out of the fucking thing. It was simply too high level for my cursed technique to accomplish anything on at my current level. As I had stated before, level 4 dead materials was my limit at the moment, and this thing was more likely than not way higher. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Published by web novel. Testing. I could only sigh and vault the stuff for now and turn my attention to my other goodies. Oh, the things I could do, the things I shouldn't do, tilde, I thought with a wide grin as I looked at my precious materials. Before all else, though, I snatched up a unicorn horn that was a spiral sharp pearlescent thing and activated my cursed technique. The shiny horn immediately flowed like liquid as black and blue cursed energy flickered over its surface, refining it. My energy expenditure was sky high because the horn was borderline level 5 and at the absolute limit I could work with. It was slow going refining the horn, but after 3 potions and my original amount of energy I managed to pull it off. The final result was a small block of white material that literally glowed with innate power because of its sheer purity and quality. Unfortunately, once I stopped, the material settled into its new state and exceeded what I could work with, as it was now either level 5 or perhaps even 6. That was fine though, because it just meant that I had a higher level material to work with after I grew strong enough. The mystic jewels and Vouvrae's tears were flat out beyond my ability at the moment, and only the deep crystals and Jackbird's golden egg were things I could use both before and after refining them. The deep crystals bordered level 5 after being refined but didn't cross that line thankfully, and the Jackbird egg was level 1 originally but hit 3 after being refined. Interestingly, the egg gained additional until now unknown properties after being refined of all its impurities and improved as much as possible. For starters, the golden material was now an absolutely phenomenal energy conduit now. To the point in fact that I could safely state it matched even the likes of a level 5 conduit material like the Vouvrae tear. There was a downside however in the form of its durability and thus longevity being absolute shit compared to a Vouvrae tear. An additional property the golden material had other than that was an affinity for the wind element. I discovered that nifty thing because the golden egg now had a weak but ever-present breeze around it, almost unnoticeable but there nonetheless. Unfortunately, none of the magics used by the members of the Familia were wind element except Belle's one of 6 flavors of bolt. Perhaps it'll prove useful for some sort of cursed tool later, I thought, setting the things aside. The deep crystals on the other hand irritated me to no end for a simple fact: they were brittle after refinement. I'm talking flick it too hard and it would shatter type brittle. The trade-off however was that it could take a titanic amount of energy now. I tested it and Belle could stuff nearly 10 full reserves of mana into the thing before it started to crack from energy strain. In hindsight, I probably should have expected so much energy used for a spell to cause a commotion, but I had hopped that aiming at the sky with Belle's wind bolt would go unnoticed since it was basically just an upward blast of air. I was so wrong. The sheer amount of mana in the crystal overcharged the spell by so much that the resulting blast literally blasted apart a cloud just minding its business thousands of feet overhead. It would have been easier to find someone with 3 eyes than someone who hadn't noticed. Thankfully, the source of that blast was not discovered, so all anyone outside the Familia knew was that someone had blasted apart a cloud from somewhere in the city. Funnily enough, no one really cared about it either, as once you hit level 5 or higher feats like that became uncomfortably common. For example, a level 6 who had specialized in the strength stat could throw a house from the middle of the city to the wall without it ever touching the ground once. That sounds impressive, but it was increasingly important to have such power the further you delved into the dungeon. The reason for this was because not only did the monster grow in power, but the actual size of the floors increased exponentially. The dungeon was a bit like an underground pyramid in how its size increased the further down you went. The 24th floor is half the size of Orario, while once you get to the 30th floor the dungeon exceeds Orario in size by more and more. I'm not talking just width either but height as well, with the 39th floor being said to be as wide as half the Great Plains surrounding Orario and so tall that it has its own rain cycle. Anyways, I suppose I should mention that we once again had a bunch of people try and join the Familia after the war game, and quite a lot of people wanting to commission items from me as well. I had to interview the people with Hestia, but none passed as they were either too sinful, wanted to join for the wrong reasons, or had the audacity to make demands of us in exchange for them joining. We needed people, sure, but we had high standards for those we would accept. The commissions were far more interesting in comparison, though some we rejected immediately for different reasons. I had no less than 50 people try and commission a staff like the one I used in the war game, and I had to explain every damn time that it was useless for literally anyone who wasn't me. The thing was meant to enhance and contain my flames and only my flames. It might as well not even be considered a staff for anyone else, but rather a pretty stick you can bomb people with. Learning that got all but 2 people to withdraw their request for such a staff. The first who still wanted one was uncomfortably enough Nyx, and the other was Ptah, who loved the aesthetic of the thing. Ptah also wanted a version of my mask, Helm, which was much more reasonable since he didn't want a technique on it but rather merely to display it, so all form but no function. Then again, other than myself, no one even knew that my headpiece was actually a cursed tool, so he might not have known that it was an option. The rest of the commissions though were either things I didn't want to make, like erotic sculptures, or weapons for people with sinful souls that I was almost certain were either evilous or just normal scumbags. I didn't let it slip what I thought of these people, but denied their requests either way. You may be wondering why I thought they were evilous when everyone knew that group of people were destroyed years back. The answer was simply that I knew from Earth that people like that never truly disappear but merely wait in the shadows where you can't see them until an opportunity to reemerge shows up. Guild Visit. Published by web novel. It was a bit like with American politicians on Earth, in fact, where they could get caught in some sort of scandal but simply fade into the background rather than truly get any meaningful punishment. Evilness obviously got more than a simple slap on the wrist, but the idea was the same. The problem still existed, just in the background, out of sight. I wasn't going to draw the attention that calling them out would, though, as to be honest, it wasn't worth the effort when they weren't my problem as a mere level 2 to deal with. Perhaps a bit callous of me, but it was simply not my problem at the moment, so I wasn't going to make it my problem if I could help it. Anyways, I ended up taking a total of 12 commissions, including the ones for Nyx and Ptah. The rest were weapons of various sorts, since apparently Ogun had spilled the beans on that weapon I made for him and Hephaestus had backed him on the quality of my stuff. Ironically, the guild actually ended up summoning me and Hestia to discuss our Familia's classification. Mr. Drake, Goddess Hestia, I thank you for coming on such short notice, but there is a small matter that demands urgent correction due to your Familia's increase in rank. As you both know, when a Familia ranks up the first time, they are required to undergo quests, but the nature of those quests change based on the orientation of the Familia in question, with Explorer-type Familia getting gathering or mapping quests in the dungeon, and crafting-type Familia crafting-related quests. Your Familia is in a rather unique situation at the moment. You are listed as an exploration-type Familia, but the recent information on Mr. Drake's ability in the crafting department has us concerned you are ill-suited to the exploration classification. Mardial Royman said seriously. Mardial Royman was, to put it bluntly, the fattest fucking elf I have ever seen. So a bit of context here is that most elves are lithe, narrow-bodied people regardless of diet or exercise habits. It was genetic that they were all skinny. You can imagine my shock to discover the head of the guild, who was an elf, looked like a fucking pear with thick short arms and legs. If I didn't specifically know for a fact that he was an elf and could see his ears being pointed, I would have known the guy to be a fat human with his looks. He was also arrogant as all shit, as he had a look of disdain when speaking to me. I had this overwhelming urge to pluck out his eyes when he spoke to me that I had to constantly wrestle with mentally. I wasn't a fan of the man. The exploration status is still accurate as a whole for the Familia, as I and the rest of our members regularly dive the dungeon. My own crafting abilities are just that, only my own, and have no bearing in this regard. I said firmly. So you say, but the guild believes that switching to a crafting classification would be more lucrative for all parties involved. The elf said with a bland expression. Sucks to be you then, exploration it stays. I said, not willing to budge an inch. HMPH, it is not up to you but rather the true leader of the Familia, Goddess Hestia, will no doubt be of a different opinion. The elf said, blowing me off, and I may have let just a little of my murderous intent loose, just a pinch I swear. I like to think that I'm a reasonable person to deal with most of the time, but when you treat me with disregard and disdain from the moment I meet you, my good nature finds its limits. Apparently it was only once he felt my not so friendly intentions that this fat fuck seemed to remember that I was a level 2 about as strong as a level 3, and he didn't even have a fauna. We were also alone in his small office, so even if he shouted, no one would be able to save him before I finished him off. I didn't act on my violent impulses, but both of us knew I was sorely tempted. As Alex said, our Familia is better suited to the exploration classification. If that's all, we'll be going now, Hestia said firmly before standing up and turning to leave the office. I went to follow her but paused briefly to turn back to look at the pale elf. A bit of friendly advice from me to you. Don't get any funny ideas about our Familia or you'll find that I am not a person you want to have a grudge against you. I said with a sharp look. My warning must have worked because the classification stayed the same as always, and the first mandatory quest we got was a fairly standard one, reach floor 17. We didn't have any members over level 2, so the floor of the first monster Rex was the furthest the guild was allowed to ask us to try and reach. I easily solved that quest by dragging Rose down there and then bringing her back safe and sound. She was unhappy to have to take the trip, but at least afterwards she seemed less angry about the fact I solo delved, so I count that as a win. I worked on my commissions at the end of the days after returning from the dungeon, but most of my day for the next month after the war game was spent with me slaughtering anything that moved in my range of vision from floor 1 to 16. The drops were also nice from those delves, but my main goal was to stock up an absolute fuckton of smoke. If I was going to cross that first limit, for level 2 in stats, I was going to go all the fucking way to get the limit sickness out of the way all at once. I finished my commissions right before the end of this month and was now ready to get my update. It should be fairly standard issue this time with a flat stat increase. I said reassuringly since Hestia looked reluctant to update me. Not that I could really blame her, as all gods get a sort of feel for what their children experience whenever they update them, and she broke down in hysterics after the last update when the war game was over. Yeah, the backlash from my skill was that intense, and as a result she was now quite hesitant to update my fauna in case I had experienced some other traumatic backlash. I hadn't, but her concerns weren't entirely unjustified either. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Published by web novel. Updates. Name, Alexander Drake. Race, cursed human. Level, 2. Strength, 463, E, to 649, C. Endurance, 582, D, to 775, B. Agility, 467, E, to 612, C. Dexterity, 451, E, to 598, D. Magic, 911, S, to 999, SS, to 1500, SSS, to 1772, X. Spells, Hell's Forge, innate technique, can use anything from a living being and reshape or refine it per one's will. Incantation, Hell's Forge, extensions, Hellfire, cursed tool creation. Skills, Heavenly Restriction. In exchange for the ability to wield mana and magic, one gains access to cursed energy and cursed techniques. Blessing of Black, permanently increases cursed energy efficiency, amount and control. Magic will always start at G rank after leveling up. Vessel of Sin, Hell's Forge Master carries the burden of all mortal sin and is tasked to purify it from the souls of the dead. Strengthens soul over time, permanent increase to crafting with cursed energy, permanent decrease to all stats for each innocent soul killed and increase for each sinful soul killed. Grant skill, Soul Gaze. Soul Gaze, see the souls of all things and their sins. Developmental skills, Curse Smith, H. A month's worth of grinding gave me a sharp increase in stats with my magic stat as per usual, growing the most and endurance coming up second due to my rather masochistic method of training out my flaws. With my current stats I was considered a high level 2, though not a peak one, as that would involve my stats being B rank at least across the board. Despite that, however, I was now easily as powerful as a mid to high mid level 3 in terms of pure stats. This meant I could with the right approach and matchup jump 2 whole levels and survive a fight with a weak level 4. That was damn impressive, but I was dreading the level up conditions I now had because I might actually have to fight and beat a level 4 to level up to 3 after I max out my stats again. Thankfully I had a perfect target in mind for that, though I'll need to solo it for it to work, which will be extremely dangerous for me even if I went all out, the Goliath. The first monster Rex was a level 4 monster that had strong regenerative abilities and tough body that in addition to its size and power made it dangerous even for whole parties of level 4s to fight. Unfortunately I needed that sort of challenge to qualify to level up, which means I'm going to need some serious prep work. Unlike myself, however, Bell apparently lucked out or cheated if I'm being honest and qualified to level up after defeating the Apollo captain in single combat. I've said it before and I'll say again, his skill is fucking busted as hell. With his strength at that time there was no way that fighting someone so mediocre for their level would be enough to qualify him for leveling up, but that was where his skill came in with its reality warping bullshit. The fight was vitally important as far as he was concerned, so he got more of an achievement from winning it. Now he had been honing his stats like myself to prepare to level up, though he had to suffer limit sickness this time after he broke the first limit, which helped me feel better. Still, despite that, his stats were now higher than mine, which was irritation to see. Name, Belcrinell. Race, human. Level, 2+, can level up. Strength, 357, F, to 715, B. Endurance, 268, G, to 728, B. Agility, 473, E, to 915, S. Dexterity, 426, E, to 912, S. Magic, 579, D, to 999, SS. Spells, Bolt Sad Face Incantation. Bolt, summons a bolt of pure magic for attacking, can be augmented with one of the elements by saying it alongside the incantation. Example, Firebolt. Skills, Liar's Freeze. Reality is merely the lies we tell ourselves. Augments growth proportionate to the strength of one's feelings. Argonaut, enduring all hardship in the name of success. Developmental skills, Luck, I. Obviously I was still stronger between the two of us, and that wasn't likely to change, though the difference in strength was starting to close. He planned to reach 999 in each of his stats before going ahead with the level up, mostly because unlike me he actually felt that SS rank was the most he could handle safely and he wasn't willing to risk trying for higher. Can't say as I blame him when we all learned from my previous level up that taking that risk can in fact mean a terrible death if you aren't prepared. My vessel had been in the process of collapsing when I leveled up to the point that I had to skip preparing for that level up and take it directly or die. I had no intentions of repeating that mistake this time and was going to prepare for my next level up before I take that last update. I even had a time frame of how long it would take me to collect the smoke I needed to hit level 2 if I stayed in the floors before floor 17, and it made me have an ugly expression. A month and a half. It would take me almost 2 more months to max all my stats if I don't go deeper. I thought with a frown. That was an unacceptable amount of time, as by the same calculations Bell would only need 3 weeks at most with his current speed. Look, I get that what I was trying to do was way harder than what he wanted to do, but I wanted to at least try to keep our level up time somewhat similar, at least for this next level up anyways. His growth, while still being increasingly difficult as he grows, simply won't be anywhere close to as hard as my own path. The trade-off is that at the end of our respective paths I will be massively better on a qualitative level. Already my soul alone was now noticeably greater than his own with the slow strengthening it gets from my skill. If we both reach godhood, I'll likely be a good bit higher up on the pecking order than he would be given our paths. Sorta like how Zeus is higher in the pecking order than say Thor or some other god of lightning. In essence their domains are similar, but Zeus's was qualitatively higher than the others. Expansion. Published by web novel. Anyways, with those updates out of the way, I decided to move on to a sort of project that I had wanted to do for quite some time now, creating a proper home for the Hestia Familia. Let's be honest here, with the addition of Daphne and Cassandra, things had gotten kinda cramped even with the temporary extra bedrooms I created for them and Lily. The church was simply no longer adequate for our needs. With this in mind and with Hestia's permission, I bought up all the land in every direction around the church of 25 acres. Dash. Let me tell you, even with these abandoned properties being fairly cheap, it still cost us a good 30 mil to snap up all that land off the market. Then of course came the fun part, leveling the whole fucking thing. Any pre-existing structures were subject to my hellfire because I had no need for basic wood, glass and stone in such amounts. The Ganesha Familia members showed up no less than 3 times to make sure I wasn't trying to burn Orario to the ground, only to leave with an apology after I showed the deed to the land and explained myself. I couldn't really blame them since my burning of the area had a thick column of smoke rising into the sky that the whole city could see. The Ganesha Familia weren't the only ones interested in seeing what was up over here. Hey Alex, what you doing? Tiona called as she ran and jumped over the flames over from the distance. I waved my hand and judged where she was going to land before taking 3 steps to the left and waiting. Crack, she hit the ground hard enough to crack it but was unharmed. If you would have waited, I could have just made a gap in the flames for you to pass through, I said with a chuckle. Meh, this way was faster, she said with a shrug. I suppose so. I'm clearing out my familia's new land since you wanted to know, I said honestly. Aren't you guys like rich now? Why not just hire someone to tear it down for you? She asked with a confused look. And miss a chance to let my pyromaniac side out? Never, I said with a grin. Oh yeah, we had this big meeting to talk about if we ever had to fight you after that war game. I said that wasn't gonna happen cause you guys are like super nice and all that, but the captain said that we needed to talk about it just in case something changed. Didn't get very far when we realized we knew nothing about you guys really, she said casually. I doubt your familia was the only one who had a meeting like that. I might have gone a little bit overboard, I said with a chuckle. I thought it was awesome. You were all like, destruction comes before creation, and then was all whoosh and bang and it was awesome, she said excitedly. I also thought it was awesome, but Hestia yelled at me for like an hour for doing it. I complained. We chatted for a while after that while I controlled the burn of the flames to stop at the edge of our land that I had marked beforehand. Eventually she saw the sun's position and split since she was actually supposed to be preparing for the next expedition. By the end of the day though, I had cleared out the full area, which was now a scorched uneven ground with a bunch of holes from my flames burning out the foundation of the buildings that used to be there. I had to spend the next week after that expanding a hole at the front of the church to turn into a pool later while using the dirt to fill in the other holes I created. I ended up having to shift the entire top layer of the property to fill in the holes, but on the positive side the dirt was now ready to be seeded with grass and flowers after I effectively tilled out all the rocks, leaving only fertile soil behind. For the pool I had Belle and Lily come with me into the dungeon to harvest a huge amount of crystal that I then smoothed out in the empty hole in the ground and colored a nice dark blue. I took a water ring and modified it slightly to only turn on when the water got below a certain point in the pool while using a cursed stone as a fuel source. I also added a water quality maintaining plate cursed tool at the bottom of the pool so it would always be clean and clear. The pool was entirely my idea, but after it was done you'd be lucky to ever find Belle not in it when he was relaxing. The guy absolutely loved the thing since apparently his farm that he grew up near had a pond nearby that he regularly swam in as a kid. With the pool done I turned my attention to finally creating a housing building for our familia. The church however was to be left as is according to Hestia, and I also wasn't allowed to put any weird ideas I might have into the building. I was heartbroken to hear this as it simply wouldn't be home without finger-eating doors and walls and floors that drank blood to clean up after the doors. I had other ideas too, like intruder raping rugs, patent pending, and LSD tripping walls. Hestia shot down all of those though, so I could only make a regular building, like a plebeian. It was basically just a 2-story tall rectangle with 20 rooms big enough for a bed, dresser, desk, closet and bathroom. Yes, each of the rooms had their own bathroom because sometimes everyone needs privacy when they drop a big stinky. At the far end of the building was a large kitchen with no expense spared stocking it with equipment. Other than that there was honestly nothing special about the place and it killed me inside to make it so boring. Hestia was happy with it though, so I only complained a little. It took me about a week to get the whole place made though, since unlike my workshop this building was just normal wood and dungeon crystal windows like the church. Hell, if anything the biggest challenge was chugging potions to fuel my curse technique to get such a massive project roughly formed. Even though all the rooms and everything were identical, the sheer size of this building meant I was practically inhaling potions one after another. It was an excellent bit of practice if I do say so myself, and I do. I was a little off it seemed about when Belle was going to level up as he hadn't quite gotten to his goal yet but was only missing about 100 stat points to get it, so I figured another 3 or so days would be the time. Hitching a Ride. Published by web novel. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O.B. in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. That's insane. You don't even have abnormal resistance. Hestia protested my plan to dive even deeper into the dungeon. Yeah, but to be fair, I'm not getting enough of a challenge from the middle floors anymore, even from the larger groups of monsters. I need something stronger, more dangerous to sharpen my claws against. Otherwise Belle's gonna leave me way behind with how fast he levels up. I insist. Belle's not trying to raise his stats to the ridiculous level you are. She shot back without backing down. Oh come on, I'm not being too unreasonable here. I won't even go deeper than the Great Tree Labyrinth, I promise. I pleaded. She looked conflicted but more likely to agree since I promised and I don't break those. I still don't like it, but I will let you go since you shouldn't be in too much danger with your strength, she said, and I grinned. If I'm being honest here, I probably could have gone to the Grand Tree Labyrinth without telling her first, but the chances that I would get spotted that deep and the information got back to her was not small enough that I felt the risk was worth taking. Still, with that taken care of, I had to prep for my first trip done that fair, and that meant it was time for paranoid packing. Healing potion, mana potions, antidotes, food, a water ring, a tent, the fucking works. I was prepped for my own personal expedition, and that meant I had 2 separate bags on me. The big bag had all my non-essentials while the smaller one had my essentials and a bunch of empty space for any drops or materials I collect while I was down there. I didn't plan to return to the surface for quite some time as I'd live and fight with a base camp on floor 18, the first safe floor Riviera. This was so that I could save time and go straight to slaughtering monsters shortly after waking up and until just before I called it a day. Riviera was sort of a tropical place with lots of trees and even a glowing crystal ceiling way overhead that you could use to tell the time. It dimmed at night and got bright during the day, which was rather interesting in my opinion. As the name suggested, the floor was also safe, in that no monsters spawned on the floor, though they did come up from below or fall down from above, which had caused the adventurer town of Riviera on the floor to get destroyed and rebuilt like 13 times so far. I had no intention of staying in the town during my time down here, though, as everything had stupidly jacked up prices. No, I was just going to use my technique to fuse some of the trees together into a makeshift house. It wouldn't be anything fancy or anything, but it would keep anything from attacking me while I slept. Before all that though, I had to get down there first, which is why I was currently talking with Finn of the Loki Familia. Mind if I help fight the Goliath? I asked after he agreed to taxi me to the 18th floor. I'm sorry, but we already have plans for the Goliath drops, he said calmly. I chuckled. I don't want any of the drops. I want practice for when I have to fight it later in the smoke from when it dies. No doubt you already know that I absorbed the stuff from Riviera, Tiona and Ice, I said casually. He nodded. They told me that you said it was some sort of skill. I might be inclined to allow you to utilize it if you can swear that it won't interfere with the drops, Finn said with a stern look. I promise that it's an entirely separate thing from the drops. As an added bonus, I'll throw in an item I made in off case the Goliath doesn't drop anything so that you don't walk away empty-handed either way. It can create water by using the wearer's mana, I said while showing off the water ring's effect. Finn's eyes lit up when he saw it in action and he asked about its number of uses and even if there was anything that could affect its abilities. I didn't mind explaining everything he could possibly need to understand about the ring since his familia were the target for me to sell the things anyways. Do you by chance intend to sell more of these rings in the future? We would be willing to pay handsomely for them as they would serve to lighten our loads by a considerable amount on each expedition, he asked seriously. That was the idea though, as should be obvious I won't be mass producing them as it takes quite the effort to make even one. Besides, don't act like I'm just giving you this one. It's collateral in the unlikely case the Goliath doesn't have any drops. Can't sell it to you anyways as I need it for my own stuff during my delve. I said honestly. A shame, it would have freed up much more room for loot on this expedition. Finn said disappointed, but he seemed to understand. That was how I ended up hitching a ride through the dungeon with the Loki Familia on their regular expedition to the deeper parts of the dungeon. All the way through the first 16 floors it was a breeze as everything that got in the way of the group got dealt with by the weaker members while anything too strong for them got dealt with by the stronger folk. You haven't used any of your magic when you fought the Minotaurs, why? Riveria asked curiously after I helped deal with a group of Minotaurs. My fire's not very good in a team type situation, tries to consume anything other than me around, which in this case means you folks. Besides that, the only way I don't insta-kill those things is if I limit myself to not using the flames. I explain honestly. Also, that's why all the reports say you solo delve, the dwarf Gareth said in understanding. Yeah, I'm not spec for teamwork, so I go alone. It's much more dangerous but at the same time far more profitable since all the loot belongs to me alone and the only person's weight I have to carry is my own. I said with a smile. Can't say I envy you, lad. Dungeon's a merciless place when you've got no one to watch your back. Claimed more than a few because of circumstances like yours, Gareth said seriously. I shrugged. It doesn't really bother me to be honest. In a way it's kinda nice since I can experiment and explore at my own pace without having to worry about keeping up or holding back for my teammates. I said honestly. Monster Rex. Published by web novel. We're coming up to the 17th floor's entrance, so I believe it prudent that I ask you not to use those flames unless I specifically say otherwise, Alex. Finn said in a way that made it clear that this wasn't up for debate. I nodded. I wasn't planning to anyways with so many people being involved in the fight. I was going to be relying on my trusted partner here to chip at the beast's ankles. I said with a smile as I patted my holstered weapon. Finn nodded. The configuration we were going with before you joined us was Tiona, Tion, Lefia and Riveria, with Lefia and Riviera being the main damage dealers with their magics, but I think we can swap you in with Tion's place as a physical fighter. That good with you? He asked after explaining the plan and I grinned. Not a problem, I said eagerly. With that settled I left my big bag with those not participating and slipped on my helm, mask. Creepy, Lefia commented when I did. I chuckled. I didn't make it to be pretty but to keep my head protected without messing with any of my senses or stopping me from drinking a potion if I needed to. I said honestly. You mean that mouth there's not for show? Riveria asked surprised. I shook my head and moved my jaw so the hinge of the mouth moved to open up. Nope, I can't eat with the teeth, but the mouth opens and closes easily in case I need to drink a potion. Admittedly, I could have just made the teeth less predatory, but it seemed like a fitting aesthetic choice given the rest of the design. I said as I moved my jaw again and the hinge shut tight again. And the ears? She asked intrigued. They work like normal ears and funnel sound from all directions into my actual ears. The appearance was merely to take advantage of the increased hearing that pointed ears have over my round human ones. Before you ask about the lack of eye holes, that is because the inside here is transparent so I can see perfectly normal. I explained, happy to share my own genius. Fascinating. You've managed to create a form of head protection that not only doesn't impede you in any way but also completely removed any weak points that could be targeted in normal head pieces. If it wasn't so unnerving, I'd suggest to Loki that we make a commission for something similar. Riveria said thoughtfully. The conversation ended there as we walked into the massive chamber that was the entirety of floor 17, the boss arena if you would. It was almost entirely made of stone with the exception of the leftmost wall that was made entirely of shiny crystal and even had a fancy nickname, the Wall of Sorrow. It was where the monster Rex spawned from, which was why it had that name, as it was the stopping point for adventurers for the longest time until the boss was finally overcome. True to form, the massive room started shaking when we walked in and the crystal wall began to crack and lose pieces of itself as the dark skin and hair of the massive Goliath appeared from behind the stuff. The Goliath was, for lack of a better description, a dark-skinned human scaled up to about 7 meters tall with black sclera and red irises. The mouth was also bigger than normal, kinda like the Titans from Attack on Titan now that I think about it. Grah, the monster roared as it freed itself from the crystal wall, all while glaring at us. Gimme them ankles, I yell as I burst forward, weapon drawn towards the slow-moving giant's legs. The monster swipes a fist at me, but I just jump up and onto its fist, which it did not like. The other arm comes at me while the arm I was on shook a lot to try and shake me off, but all this size and strength didn't mean the monster moved fast at all. In fact, I'd say it was just barely slow enough for me to handle so like high-level free roundabout. The rest of my temporary party didn't just sit back while I did my job, which in this case was make a nuisance of myself while the mages chanted their spells. Tiona was grinning from ear to ear as she rushed in with me, but while I went high she was at the monster's ankles with her urga. The thing had very tough skin and tendons, so even her strength only allowed her to cut the tendon of one of the legs with a full-on slash. Grah, the monster roared in pain as it fell over, which was not an opportunity I missed. I kicked off the tough flesh of the thing's arm when it started going down and held my weapon sideways. Crack. A sound not unlike a sledgehammer hitting a brick rang out as my weapon slammed into the Goliath's nose. The recoil took me by surprise because for the first time ever I hit something that didn't move when I hit it, which means I got moved instead. Blood shot out of the monster's nose and its eyes lost focus as its mind got fuzzy from the head trauma. Back, Tiona called to warn me to get out of the blast radius of the mages. I heeded the warning and ran out of there the moment I hit the ground from my recoil-induced fall. Wind Fimelvetter. Wind Fimelvetter. Both elves finished their chants at the same time and two waves of white frost, one smaller and one much bigger, shot forward and struck the monster, freezing it solid. Heya, Tiona immediately leapt forward and smashed her blade into the frozen monster, which shattered its now brittle form. A wave of thick black smoke poured out as the magic stone and a single large tooth fell to the ground alongside the leftover frost. Everyone stared as the smoke rapidly flowed through the air and sank into my body. I couldn't help but shudder in pleasure at the unbelievably thick and high-quality smoke filled me more that even a month of grinding had accomplished before this trip. That's the good shit right there, I exclaimed with a laugh as I holstered my weapon. The fight wasn't very long, but as anyone who has ever fought before can tell you, they so very rarely do last all that long. Even less so when the opponent is outnumbered, out-strategized and outgunned by a large amount. Honestly, the only purpose I and Tiona served were as a distraction while the mages chanted their magic, which was basically guaranteed death for the Goliath that couldn't dodge. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Published by web novel. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O.B. in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. Riviera. Fascinating. You caught me off guard, so I couldn't observe this process last time with the Minotaur very well, but it appears that this smoke from the monster gets sucked in through those tattoos. I thought they were symbolic? Riveria pondered out loud. They are symbolic, but they also have a practical function as well. I never said they didn't after all. I said with a grin as I picked up the drops from the ground to hand to her. Oh, I see, a half-truth so that you didn't trigger the god's lie detection ability. Seems unnecessary if you were willing to share this information like this. The high elf said, confused. I was just messing with Hermes as all since the guy had plans to make trouble for me. You could see it in his eyes. I said with a laugh. I see, she said, but clearly didn't approve. Can't say as I blame her since it was common knowledge that Hermes was an extremely well-connected individual. Messing with him was a very dangerous game, but I wasn't afraid of danger. If I was, I wouldn't have just fought the Goliath as a level 2 even if I was working with powerful people like these. What an odd skill. I've never heard about anything like it before. Finn said as he walked up with my bag and more importantly my ring. I shrugged. It is what it is. Suppose this is where we part ways as you lot are going to be skipping the next floor, right? I said casually. Finn nodded. We will hit Riviera on the way back up, but we don't need anything there at the moment. He said honestly. If you get back within 2 weeks I should still be camping out on the floor. If not, you probably just miss me. I said casually. Usually takes about a month for us to get to our target floor and back, so you'll be long gone by the time we come back up. Riveria said and I nodded. We parted ways there as I slid down the stone slope leading to the next floor while the expedition group got everyone ready to do the same without crashing into each other. In 2 weeks roughly the Goliath would respawn and my goal was to get my last update and fight it at that time. Dash. The quality and volume of smoke I had from helping kill the Goliath was more than enough to raise my magic stat to the max and maybe bring my other stats to B rank across the board. From this it was clear that the Goliath was worth far more than anything found even a floor before it. Not all that surprising really, since it was classified as a level 4 monster and only level 2 monsters were found at most in the floors before it. Not counting variants of course that could scale theoretically infinitely. Not surprised it took so long for adventurers to get past that thing when they only had level 2 monsters to hone themselves on before suddenly finding themselves against a level 4 monster Rex. I thought with a serious expression. As someone who had to solo the dungeon, sudden jumps in difficulty like that were something I particularly had to be cautious of. Thankfully the next jump was one that I was uniquely suited to due to the properties of my flames in regards to water. The next jump was of course referring to Amphispina, the water palace floors. In the water labeled a low level 6 monster Rex, but out of water merely a mid to high level 5 monster Rex. The reason for that distinction was that the monster was a huge twin-headed water dragon, so obviously it was much more dangerous in the water than on land since it wasn't well suited for terrestrial movement. My flames however treated water like it was gasoline, so I was likely the single worst opponent for the monster Rex, even with that magic smothering red gas that it was famous for using. Anyways, that was a thing to deal with in the future, but for now I was on the 18th floor. My first impression was that it was a normal forest. The glowing stone and crystal ceiling high above kinda ruined that though. It truly did look like a normal forest too, as it was full of grassy soil and lots of trees with weeds and flowers that were all normal for a forest. The biggest issue with the forest though, besides the ceiling that gave away that it wasn't a normal forest, was that it was too quiet. There were no squirrels, birds, deer, wolves or even insects to be found besides the few that were brought in from outside the dungeon by research classification Familias. The dungeon for whatever reason didn't actually have a functioning ecology structure despite what the floor's designs made one think. At the same time however, once a new animal species is introduced to the dungeon from outside, it can live in and even thrive within the dungeon so long as it was an herbivore or had a prey species introduced as well. The really fascinating part though was that fish of both freshwater and saltwater varieties can thrive in the dungeon's waters and nobody has a fucking clue why. People had certainly used this to their advantage though, as at the far northern part of floor 18 was a man-made but dungeon-filled fish farm that all of Orario got their fish from. It was made by creating an artificial structure that was the water body before redirecting water that flowed on this floor to the spot that was then stocked with fish of various sorts to be grown out and harvested sustainably. It was a clever way to get around the outrageous prices merchants charged to import fish from the coasts or lakes of this continent. Anywho, I walked to the left of the drop-off point for entry to this floor from the 17th floor. I wanted to get as close to the entrance of the next floor, which was the start of the Grand Tree Labyrinth, as I could before I set up my campsite. Running my hand along the wall casually, I froze about halfway to the stairs down. This part of the wall was hollow. My innate technique told me whenever something came from a living source, but also told me of how hard, roughly anyways, it would be for me to do something with. The wall had suddenly gone from alive, impossible, ungodly heavy resistance, to dead, very difficult, high resistance. Actually fully activating my curse technique told me that this was a false wall that was hollow behind it and a heavily enchanted one as well. It didn't belong and I knew it immediately. It was beyond my current ability to crack open at the moment though, so I mentally made a note to come back here later to see what this was. Final preparations. Published by web novel. Danmachi-Hell's Forge. Alexander Drake died and got reincarnated by R.O.B. in the world of Danmachi with a gift in the form of Hell's Forge in exchange for his memories of that world. He will go on to become an adventurer in the dungeon city of Orario from there. After I moved on from that spot, I quickly made it to the stone stairway heading down to the 19th floor, which was the start of the Great Tree Labyrinth, or a place that was a huge tree with no known top or bottom that was a sort of labyrinth with much of those floors being undiscovered. Those floors were where the first level 3 monsters, the Lizard Man, Vouvray, Mammoth Fool, Deadly Hornet and Bloody Hive. The rest of the monsters with the exception of 2 were peak level 2 and the 2 outliers were low level 4. The level 2s were Bugbear, Battle Boar, Firebird, Mad Beetle, Dark Fungus, Gun Libellula, Sword Stag, Metal Rabbit and Hobgoblin. The 2 level 4s were the Green Dragon and the Moss Huge, with the dragon being classified as such due to its power and tough defenses that were just below the Goliaths, and the Moss Huge because it was very intelligent and could create fake version of itself without magic stones as decoys. At floor 19 you would at most only find the level 2 monsters and very rarely a Vouvray, Lizard Man or Deadly Hornet. The Great Tree Labyrinth only consisted of 6 floors total, starting from 19 and ending on 24, with floor 25 being the first floor of the water palace levels of the lower floors. Anyways, this next bit is a bit of an info dump about the description of the monsters in the Great Tree Labyrinth. Lizard Men were 6-foot-ish tall humanoid lizard monsters with red scales and the ability to use weapons to a minor degree. Vouvrays were sort of like lamias with serpentine lower halves and the upper halves of women. They also had a red gem on their foreheads and draconic wings on their back, as well as long claws on their human fingers. Mammoth Fools were the largest of the regular monsters, reaching height of 6 to 7 meters and having bulky hairy bodies and long spear-like curved tusks. Deadly Hornets were basically hornets scaled up to about the size of a person and had stingers that could pierce even heavy armor and kill most level 2s in a single thrust. Add on their poison and habit of appearing with friends and you can understand why they are ranked as level 3 monsters. In the same vein, we have the Bloody Hive, which is basically a huge hornet's nest that spawns bloody hornets rapidly to kill any adventurers found nearby. This is technically not a monster so much as a monster summoning object created by the dungeon, but is classified as high level 3 and needed a powerful adventurer to handle without a team. Bugbears were basically bears that were more or less equal to a minotaur but were faster. Battle Boars were big-ass pigs and something I was looking forward to hunting to see if it made good bacon. Firebirds were small red birds that shot fire at you as they moved through the air and were supposedly more common the closer to the floor ceiling you were. Mad Beetles were person-sized beetles that stood on 2 legs and used the other legs like daggers. Dark Fungus were strange monsters with no set shape but were entirely made of poisonous mushrooms that spread their spores to poison people from safety. Gun Libellula were big-ass dragonflies that shot projectiles and were a bitch and a half to hit apparently. Sword Stags were legit deer with metallic and sharp antlers and a homicidal streak a mile wide. Metal Rabbits were larger, more durable versions of the horned rabbits from before with steel gray fur. Finally were the Hobgoblins that were honestly just bigger, stronger, smarter and more dangerous goblins. Personally, I was rather looking forward to these new monsters not just for the sheer variety but also because their materials were so much better than the stuff I was using right now, which means it was time for some motherfucking gear upgrades. Minor ones but still upgrades. Also, a fun thing about the Great Tree Labyrinth is that it was chock full of delicious fruits and medicinal plants that excite alchemists or something like that. Personally, I was more interested in the drops and improved smoke quality and quantity that hopefully will let me get near the max in all my stats 2 weeks from now. Before all that though, I needed to set up my campsite on the 18th floor's entrance to the 19th floor. It wasn't really all that hard to find a nice private spot with a lot of trees tightly grown together. Let's make them even tighter, shall we? I thought with a chuckle as I touched one of the trees and activated my technique. The tree shuddered but pulled up its roots and moved over to another tree and fused together with it. I continued this process until I had an entire 8x8 size wall of trees with a roof of branches overhead and a door of bark and still living wood that was flexible at the side to allow it to swing open and close. Ha, suck it scrubs, I thought with a grin at my personal tree fort, one of a kind. It kinda stood out a little since you know I had to fuse a bunch of trees together to make it, but unless you came this way into the forest for some strange reason you'd never see it traveling the normal trail from this floor to the next. The best part though was that as far as monsters would be concerned it would just be a normal tree and thus not something worth attacking. With my campsite now good and created I set out the bedroll, tent, lamp and portable campfire. The later 2 run off of magic stones which aren't going to be a problem since I was going to be hunting monsters. With my lodgings covered it was now time for me to report to Hestia with my chatterbox coin. Ring ring, Alex to goddess, pick up goddess. I spoke into the coin with a snicker. Why do you always do that? Hestia's voice came from the other side of the coin with an irritated tone. Ah, don't be like that. I was even nice enough to call and let you know that I made it to the 18th floor safely and set up camp. I said with a chuckle. Fine, but you better be careful and make sure to call me every day. She said like a chiding mother. With that done it was finally time to head to the 19th floor and get my first taste of the monsters there. I saw a few other adventurers heading down with me but we stayed out of each other's way. The 19th floor based on first impressions was easily the most beautiful I have seen so far as there was flowers all over the place and this nice wooden jungle aesthetic that I was a fan of.